Our guest for the next hour is Richard Weiss, Green Party candidate for U.S. Senate. Why are you running for the Senate?
Well, I believe the voters need an alternative because and normally in a midterm election, only about a third of the electorate actually votes. And I would like to bring more voters to the polls and provide an alternative that people can vote for.
Well, welcome to the PCN Call-In Program. I'm Phil Beckman. For the next hour, our guest will answer your questions about his candidacy for the U.S. Senate. Our toll-free number is 1-877-PA6-5001. Let's talk about some of the alternatives here. So the Green Party is not one of the big major parties like the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. How do you see the nature of your alternative view?
Well, we believe that the major parties are not really progressive enough. They're not moving forward with the issues that people are really interested in. And so the Green Party is providing an alternative, and we commit to actually pursuing these policies that we believe the majority of the public really wants.
How long have you been a member of the Green Party? I
became a member the first time in 2016, I believe.
And what was it that attracted you to the party?
Well, I really wasn't very happy with the primary of the Democratic Party in 2016. And so I suppose I just didn't believe the situation was going to improve. And I looked around and I found that the Green Party's policies matched with my beliefs better than any other.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania. My parents owned a bakery. I worked in the family bakery. Went to University of Pittsburgh.
What did you study at the University of Pittsburgh?
I received a BA in political science. I had minors in German and philosophy.
What did you like about political science? Did you have an interest in politics from an early age?
I kind of fell into political science. My first interest was actually science. And so I took a summer program in after my junior year of high school, and I took calculus and physics at CMU for college credit. And although I passed and I did get college credit for them, I decided that those people were smarter than me in math and science, and I was going to do something else. So I went to Pitt because I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and I had a lot of choices in the College of Arts and Sciences. My first major was economics, and then I switched to political science.
Now, you also would go to law school. Did you go to law school right out of Pitt, or did you do something else before that?
Yes, I went right out of Pitt. I was thinking of various possibilities in either the sciences, arts and sciences, or law school or business school. And I got the highest grade on the LSAT, the law school admissions test, and I was in the 90th percentile, so I decided to do that.
So once you graduated from law school, where was your first legal job?
Well, I'll mention that I went to law school at the University of Denver, Colorado, and then I received a fellowship to go to a master's degree in international law at American University in Washington, D.C. And then it was from that program that I went into the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is the U.S. government foreign aid program.
Talk a little bit more about that. Were you stationed overseas with USAID?
I really would have liked to do that, but I was a general service rather than foreign service. And so I was stationed in Washington, D.C., and the offices were in the State Department building.
And what kind of work did you do for them?
I was actually the first, if not the only, new entry lawyer hired by the agency. Because they had a new ethics office. And so I was an ethics attorney. But while I was there, I also worked on defending the agency against a bid protest and also on EEOC claims.
So and how long were you at that agency?
I stayed for 1 year.
And where did you go after that?
Well, I happened to meet an Indonesian attorney in my LLM program, Master of Laws program at American University, and I decided to follow her back to Jakarta, Indonesia, and that's where we were married, and that's where I worked, and eventually we opened a law firm of our own there. But although we're still on amicable terms, we're no longer married.
So do you still currently work as a lawyer?
Yes, I do. Since then, I've divided my time between Jakarta, Indonesia, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And while in Indonesia, I worked on foreign investment in Indonesia, project finance for power projects. And I'm glad to be able to work on the largest geothermal power plant project in Indonesia in Sarula on Sumatra Island. When in Pittsburgh, I've done what you might call gig work for lawyers. I work on individual projects for law firms anywhere in the country. It's possible to register with agencies and they find these projects, and they can range anywhere from 2 days to 2 months to years. I found my first one of those in Pittsburgh with in downtown Pittsburgh, and I worked at that firm for about 7 years.
What do you like about being a lawyer?
Well, I have to say I really like the law. It's hard to recommend because the job prospects are not the best, but I really enjoyed everything I've learned and everything I've worked on.
How do you think your experience as a lawyer would inform your role as a U.S. Senator?
Well, it's extremely important to understand the way laws are written and how these would be interpreted, and think of how they would be interpreted by adverse parties to your position, and see how they would be used or misused. And so it's actually quite a difficult process in crafting the law.
Now, you mentioned that you joined the Green Party in 2016. How have your political views changed over time?
Well, I would say I've stayed more the same. I just feel as though the party I was in wasn't fulfilling the great promise that they had. And so I moved to a party that I think is more committed to their ideals.
Have you run for office before?
Well, 2 years ago, I was the Green Party candidate for Attorney General in Pennsylvania.
What did you learn from that experience?
I believe it's important for the party to run candidates in every election, and we were able to obtain enough votes to qualify for minor party status in Pennsylvania. So it's very encouraging, actually, and we're going to continue to advance from that position.
What is as you're campaigning, what types of things are you doing? Are you getting out and holding events? Are you meeting with voters?
Well, I have gone to various events locally, but around the state, I'm going to remote events like this through Zoom calls. I actually prefer not to go to in-person events because I believe the pandemic is still ongoing and they could be super spreader events.
What have you been hearing from voters about their concerns?
It seems that the voters also, it depends on which voters you mean. There are many voters who stay home, and those are really the ones that I'm speaking to. I'm not interested in being a spoiler. I understand that those who can vote for the major parties will vote for them. And I'm speaking to the people who believe that these parties don't speak to them anymore. So Green Party represents the ordinary people, the 99%, the working people, and they are feeling as though they're ignored and they're not really, their concerns are not being addressed.
Have you received any endorsements?
I've been endorsed by the Green Party of Pennsylvania so far.
How would you distinguish yourself from your competitors?
Well, actually, I don't want to run a negative campaign. I would just say that I believe that the Green Party would be more committed to the working people, to their concerns regarding jobs and regarding health care, regarding the climate, more so than the other parties.
If you were elected, what would be the first thing that you would do as a U.S. Senator?
Well, when I first said I would run for senator, I said the first thing I would do is call for a vote on the Medicare for All bill that's already been submitted to Congress.
Can you talk about that bill? What are some of its provisions?
Well, a lot of people are a little bit confused because current Medicare you do have to pay for, and it doesn't cover everything. So this is not just Medicare, it's improved Medicare. And it expands to apply to everyone. Everyone can obtain this Medicare. They can get health care without paying, without a premium, without a deductible, without a copay, although I'm personally do not mind a small copay. And it will cover more things like dental and vision and drugs.
Would Medicare for All require a change in the taxes to support it?
The way the bill is currently written, yes. Other countries spend twice as much as the U.S. and they have better health outcomes. So although there would be a tax for it, you would get something for that tax, and it would be less expensive than what we're paying now. So I say we're really already paying a tax, and that tax is the premiums and the deductibles and the copays, as well as the profit of the health insurance companies.
How much support is there for this measure in Congress?
There is still, it depends on who you talk to. You see, many Democrats say they support it, but when it comes time to call for a vote, they haven't done so. So I would be there championing that this bill be moved forward. But I would like to just add to my previous answer that although the bill currently calls for a tax, I'm also in favor of reducing the defense budget, and that money could be put towards universal health care for all.
So, well, let's talk a little bit about defense. Is there certain specific areas that you would like to reduce?
I think that it's not necessary for the U.S. to be maintaining 800 military bases around the world. I think we could scale that back to pre-9/11 levels, bring the troops home. If we cut the military budget in half, we would not only be spending as much as Russia, not only as much as Russia and China combined, but twice as much as Russia and China combined on defense. And I think we can defend the country quite well with that amount.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about how that fits into America's larger role in the world. What do you envision America to be as a global power?
At the moment, I think the majority of the voters in the country would prefer that the U.S. focus on issues within the country rather than around the world.
Now, we've seen this year Russia invading Ukraine, and the Biden administration has been providing a lot of support for Ukraine. What do you think of President Biden's policy? And if you were in the U.S. Senate, how would you vote on some of the support bills?
I believe that the majority of the voters in the U.S. would prefer that the focus be on issues within the U.S. and that would prefer that money to be spent on issues in the U.S. like infrastructure, like reduction of lead in the water, like clean drinking water, and issues like that.
So if you were elected, would you vote against legislation that would provide support for Ukraine?
I believe I could not vote for that legislation.
How do you see the role of NATO in the world, and how important is that for America's security?
I think what we've seen from the Russian invasion is that Russia is not the great threat that we thought it was. Russia's been invading for over 6 months, and they're not past eastern Ukraine, and they're being, in fact, pushed back now. So I don't see a huge role for NATO. In addition, although I'm in favor of humanitarian aid, I don't believe that the U.S. public really wants a long, drawn-out confrontation in Ukraine with Russia that could involve sending U.S. sons and daughters to go fight on the front lines in Ukraine, which is not really a strategic interest to the United States. So I'm really not in favor of NATO because what it does is it creates these cross-defense agreements with all these countries that are not necessarily of great strategic importance to the United States. And I would not agree to send any troops to go fight and die there. And another reason that NATO has not shown to be very effective is that NATO has done nothing to push Russia out of Ukraine. If NATO is so powerful and so useful, why didn't they push Russia out of Ukraine already? And that's because there is not a lot of support in the US for sending our sons and daughters to go fight and die there. And so if Ukraine were to join NATO, I would feel the same way. I still do not want to send anyone to go fight there. No Americans. Why should we? It's not of strategic importance.
Now, in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, longtime neutral countries like Finland and Sweden petitioned to join NATO, and that is a process that is unfolding. Do you think those countries should be allowed to join the alliance?
My actual opinion is that the NATO should be scaled back. And so I'd rather not have any further expansion of NATO. And in fact, I'd rather have NATO phased out. Europe seems not as concerned as the US. Europe has enough money to defend themselves and enough weapons to defend themselves. And if they're not concerned, then I'm not really as concerned if the border moves a little bit in an area that 40 years ago was part of Russia anyway. So I think now, where Russia has just suffered some losses, some defeats, would be a good time to just say, okay, this is the border, and let's end all hostilities and stop here, and we'll negotiate a final peace.
Yeah, we're going to take a telephone call. Robert from Clearfield, you're on the PCN Call-In Program. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Candidates, perhaps you said if you could be more specific about the Medicare for All plan, and would you support an initial plan where people 55 and older can buy into Medicare? I said, that's where the greatest need is. He said people have no employment because, just chased up because they're too old. The second question is with regard to Europe. Are you aware of the fact that if Putin gets Ukraine, he will control 1/3 of the world's grain production, 50% of the oilseed production, 40% of the world's fertilizer production, and 70% of Europe's natural gas and energy comes from Russia. Now, he said, do you really would like to see all that placed in the hands of one man? And when it comes to U.S. energy production, we're just about tapped out, or maximum production-wise. And you can see what's happening. He said in the western United States, it's not realistic to believe that the U.S. can make up that kind of production needs if everything of that order falls under Putin's control. So that's my question for you, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, with regard to your first question, that is a proposal to move in the direction of Medicare for All, is to extend current Medicare to 55 instead of 65 and older today. And I would support that, although, like I said, I would still submit the Medicare for All bill as well for a vote. And as Phil has mentioned, that might not pass, but I think by submitting it, it brings it into the public view, and there will be more people calling for it from their representatives. With regard to Ukraine, I'm not really proposing that all of Ukraine go back to Russia. What I'm proposing is that I think this is a golden opportunity right now, because Russia's suffered some losses, that we can just say, we can just draw the border where it is right now and say that we'll stop. and this is a chance where they might take it because they're seeing a long road ahead and a lot of cost and a lot of losses for themselves as well.
Do you think the United States should be the one to make that decision for the Ukrainians? If they want to keep fighting, would you advise the United States to oppose that?
Well, the reason why the Ukrainians are able to do this is because of support from the U.S. And so really, I think it depends on the U.S.
So I want to talk about another issue, which is infrastructure. Here in the United States, we have bridges and roads, ports, airports. Congress and President Biden recently signed a bill dealing with infrastructure. What do you see as some of the key infrastructure needs that the country has right now?
Well, definitely, we've seen bridges collapse. We definitely need bridges, roads. I think we should improve public transportation. We should have high-speed rail to different parts of the country. We should have public transportation in every city so that people are not dependent on their cars. Those sorts of things.
How do you think infrastructure projects should be funded? Do you think that there should be a tax increase, or are there other revenue sources that you think that we should use?
I would like to cut other parts of the budget first, and as I mentioned, the defense budget. But we have created entire agencies like Department of Homeland Security, and these functions could be provided by agencies that existed before that, and I don't think we need that agency.
Do you think that infrastructure needs are an issue that can be dealt with in a bipartisan way? Is there bipartisan support for a lot of these issues?
Well, I certainly hope so. From what I understand, but when some states have voted against aid to other states, but when they have a hurricane strike, then they're willing to accept aid. And I think we're getting into a position where we're all in the same boat. We're all going to suffer from climate change, and we're going to have one problem or another in all parts of the country. So I think it will become a bipartisan or multi-partisan issue if it isn't already.
So I want to talk about some criminal justice issues. What is your position on something like cash bail?
I am against cash bail. And the way it's described by others, it's like they claim that you're letting criminals free. And the truth is, cash bail requires that people who have not been convicted of any crime to be held in custody, incarcerated, for no reason other than that they don't have money. And so I turn that issue around, actually, and I say, if someone's a danger to the community, then they should be held until trial, and the judge can make that decision. And why would you let them out just because they have money to pay bail? So I think there should be no cash bail.
Now, we've seen in several states, including Pennsylvania, the legalization of medical marijuana, and there is an effort both at the state level and the federal level to support decriminalization of marijuana. Where do you stand on that issue?
The Green Party and I are in favor of legalization or decriminalization of cannabis. And this is another area where we could save a great deal of money that could be used on infrastructure projects or for other things like Medicare for All, because simply incarcerating people for nonviolent offenses like possession of cannabis is completely unnecessary, and it uses resources of police, for prosecution, judges, and incarceration. This is a tremendous amount of money that's spent for an unnecessary purpose. And so I'm in favor of decriminalization, and not only that, but let everyone out who's already in jail for offenses related to mere possession, nonviolent offenses, and expunge all past records. And I've heard other people say they want to do that, and time has passed and nothing's happened. In fact, there are more people incarcerated now for possession of cannabis than before these people were elected who said they wanted to legalize cannabis. So that's my position.
Now, states like Pennsylvania and other states around the country have for many years suffered from an epidemic of opioid addiction and abuse. What do you think we should do to get a handle on this issue?
That has been a problem due to the companies were pushing these and downplaying the risk of addiction. And there have been a number of companies already prosecuted, and I hope we continue that effort. It is a little bit different issue than drugs that are not prescribed drugs. For the illegal drugs, I would say that actually legalizing cannabis would reduce those. Cannabis is actually not what they call a gateway drug, but an off-ramp drug. They would be satisfied with that and not move on to harder drugs.
Now, you're in Western Pennsylvania, and that's an area where we've seen over the past decade or so a lot of drilling for natural gas. What do you think of the natural gas industry's work in that part of the state?
Well, we're actually in a climate crisis, and we need to scale back. We need to stop any new fracking or oil drilling, and we have to scale back existing fracking and drilling as quickly as reasonably possible. Now, I believe that we should not just end it immediately, but we should invest in renewable energy and replace the fossil fuel energy as we scale back. As we increase the renewable energy, we scale back the fossil fuel projects, because fracking is especially toxic. It has been getting into the groundwater, although they say it does not, it still does. And then there is a great deal of uranium under Pennsylvania. So this is bringing up radioactive materials, and it's getting into the air. They can measure radioactivity downwind from the fracking wells, and there is a higher rate of cancers, leukemias around these fracking wells. And then there's thousands of uncapped wells in Pennsylvania. It's a requirement to cap them, and yet we still have them. So it's really leaving a problem for the taxpayers to clean up. So I think we have to stop the fracking, at least immediately stop all new fracking and scale back the existing as quickly as possible.
Well, let's give our guest a break while we take a look at PCN's programming schedule. Coming up next, On the Issues discusses unpaid Pennsylvania Turnpike tolls with Senator Lisa Boscola. That's tonight at 8 o'clock. Tomorrow, Speaker of the House Brian Cutler joins the PCN Call-In Program. He'll talk about the State House agenda and his legislative priorities. Watch that Wednesday night live at 7. Stay up to date with the election 2022 with PCN. Watch debates, candidate interviews, and more on demand for free at pcntv.com/election. And finally, please find a moment to thank your local cable company for PCN. They carry us on their channel lineup as a public service. We receive no state or federal tax dollars. Now, on the Green Party website, one of the key goals that's listed there are sustainable and ecologically responsible jobs. What types of jobs are those, and how would you develop them?
The renewable energy sector actually provides more jobs than the fossil fuel sector. So when we transition to renewable energy, we're going to be creating a tremendous number of jobs. This is in the solar cell industry, in the turbine industry, wave power. This is installing battery and solar cells throughout the state and throughout the country. And these jobs are going to be ongoing. The jobs are renewable too. The fossil fuel jobs are going to end. The fracked oil and gas runs out, and then they leave, and those jobs are gone.
And we're going to take another telephone call. Joe from Allegheny Township. You're on the PCN Call-In Program. Go ahead.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for having me. I've got two quick questions. One, does the Green Party support boycotting products made in China and India whose production process pollutes severely? And does the candidate support pulling manufacturing back to the United States where we can manufacture more environmentally friendly than what China can? Thank you. I'll hang up and listen.
Thank you. Well, I'm not exactly sure of the Green Party position on that, but I have my own position on that. And that is that I would support a kind of a tariff that is based on the working conditions in other countries. So this includes environmental laws, this includes OSHA type laws and minimum wage laws, so that it would cancel out any benefit of moving jobs out of the country. I think it's dangerous, actually, to be over-reliant on China. And we saw what happened with the pandemic when we couldn't get anything from China for a while, and we're over-reliant on one country. I think it's also a security issue. So with this type of a tariff, it would basically cancel out the benefit of moving jobs overseas. And countries with those types of laws that would be on par with the US would be able to escape that tariff. And that would be Western Europe, Canada, Australia, Japan, and those sorts of countries.
Now, over the summer, the Supreme Court, in its Dobbs ruling, overturned Roe versus Wade. What do you think about that ruling?
It's really saddening that had to occur, because I think that was a good precedent, and that should be maintained. The Green Party supports reproductive rights, and so do I. So I would support legislation to codify Roe v. Wade.
Do you think that abortion should be covered under Medicare for all?
It's health care. It must be. There are abortions that have to be done. These ectopic abortions, it's going to not only kill the embryo, but it's going to kill the mother if it continues. This is health care. It should be covered.
Now, one of the issues that has come up over the past year has been the issue surrounding the filibuster in the U.S. Senate. What do you think about the filibuster? Is this something that you would support ending, or would you support maintaining it in place?
Well, I would support ending it, but the filibuster is really a red herring issue, because many years ago, they already figured out a way to get around the filibuster, and the filibuster is not an impediment to any legislation. All it takes is 50 senators plus the tie-breaking vote of the vice president to overcome any filibuster. They've already done it over 100 times. This rule for cloture requires 60 votes, but there is a loophole. That is, someone can just call for the end, and if they take a vote and say, we're ending debate, then someone has to object and say, you haven't got the 60 votes. Then the loophole is they can take a vote whether the rules were properly followed to close debate, when they voted majority to close debate instead of 60. And if they vote majority on that vote, debate is ended, and they have completely wiped out the filibuster, and they can do that anytime they want. So it's really not an issue. The filibuster is not an impediment to passing any legislation, and they can pass any legislation with a majority anytime they want.
How important are voting rights to your campaign?
Voting rights are extremely important. We should make it as easy as possible for people to vote. So I believe that we should allow people to be registered to vote as soon as they're born. We should allow people to come in and they are registered to vote as they walk into the polling place, and they can vote immediately.
Is there any existing legislation that you would support to secure voting rights?
Well, the HR1 legislation is quite good. It has many things also about gerrymandering, which should be addressed. But it also contains poison pills for the Green Party. It increases the requirements in order to get on the ballot for third parties. So currently, the Green Party would only have to raise $5,000 in 20 states. And now with the new law, it would require $25,000 in every state. So that would be a tremendous increase in hurdle. I personally, I believe the Green Party agrees. I believe that campaigns should be publicly financed. We represent working people, and they already don't have any money. So I don't want to ask them for money. So it's like every party should get the same amount of money. Every party should get the same amount of airtime. Then this means every party that has gone through the requirements to get on the ballot. And so it's very difficult to say how I would vote on that HR1 because it contains both good and bad.
What do you think about our current immigration policies?
I think we need to take care of the refugees and people seeking asylum. I think that the people who are already working here, who are undocumented, are actually quite useful. These are people who are taking jobs that Americans would not take, and they are very helpful to the economy. And we should get them documents so that they can come and go as they need to. I'm not opposed to requiring people to have documents to come and go normally, but like I said, we should get the people who are already working here the proper documents to do that. Also, people are allowed to come and seek asylum, and we should make provision for them. I understand, though, that the border states have that burden, and they should receive federal money to help to deal with that issue.
Now, one of the important roles that the U.S. Senate has is approving nominations for judges. Are there specific characteristics that you would look for in judges?
I think it is reasonable to ask how they feel about reproductive rights. And so I think that should be, it would be a question that would be important to me.
Now, are there any other Green Party members that are in the Senate or in the House of Representatives?
Currently, there are not, so I would be the first.
So if you were elected, which party would you caucus with?
That depends on the issue, because certainly with Medicare for All, I would be trying to work with Bernie Sanders and anyone he caucuses with. Basically, on any issue that the Green Party is in favor of, I will caucus with the people in favor of that issue. So when it comes to the issue of military aid to Ukraine, the Republicans might actually be closer to my position.
What types of policies would you like to see put in place regarding firearms?
At a minimum, we should return to the 1994 assault weapons ban. When that legislation sunset, the shootings went up 32%. So I definitely believe it was a help. But longer term, I think we should work on a definition and categorize weapons as military grade or civilian grade, and the military grade weapons would not be available to the public.
Now, I want to go back to a foreign policy issue. Over the past few administrations, there's been an effort to pivot to the Pacific in order to deal with the rise of China as a competitor. Do you think that we have enough military resources in the Pacific to counter China?
I think we shouldn't be afraid of China. We should engage as equals with China. And by building up militarily, that is actually provocative. That's like saber rattling. And if we can progress peacefully, we're not going to need more military assets. So I think we have more than enough military assets now, and we should even scale back some.
President Biden has said recently that the United States would come to the aid of Taiwan in the occasion of a Chinese attack. Do you think the United States should militarily support Taiwan in that event?
You know, that has to be decided by the people who live there. And it's not really for me to impose my decision one way or the other. So I think it was actually proper and diplomatic to not answer that question and not say what the U.S. would do, because it would depend on the exact specifics of that situation as it actually occurs.
Well, we have just a couple of minutes left. Use that time to tell voters why they should vote for you.
Well, I provide an alternative, and definitely I would promote and vote for codifying Roe v. Wade, legalization of cannabis, ending fracking and fossil fuels as quickly as reasonably possible so that we can get climate change under control. And I'm not certain that the other parties are going to do this.
Well, our guest tonight has been Richard Weiss, Green Party candidate for U.S. Senate. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
After tonight's call-in program, stay with PCN for On the Issues. We'll talk about unpaid Pennsylvania Turnpike tolls with Senator Lisa Boscola. That's next at 8 o'clock. And if you didn't get a chance to call in and comment during our show, you can post your question or comment to our Facebook page or on Twitter. I'm Phil Beckman. Thanks for watching.